When people have trouble paying attention, when they're too emotional or reactionary or downright aggressive, what can we do to help them turn it around? Perhaps too often these behaviors are addressed with medication and medication for ADHD or bipolar disorder. What if there's more than what meets the eye? Today, we are talking about recognizing, or rather identifying unrecognized trauma with Shuhaida Adam, social worker at Islamic Care Line. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Shuhaida, and shukran for joining me.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Wonderful to be on the show and we're discussing such a topic that we call it unrecognized. Another term that we often use is the unhealed wounds, the invisible wounds. It's something that many people are not really aware of. It's not even recognized as traumas. But as you introduced, then the effect and the end outcomes are rather unhealthy. So it's something that I really want to bring to people's attention, and people can just sort of reflect. If there's anything about what we talk today that resonates with you, it's just a little bit of reflection to realize whether you would like to reach out for some help in at least this unresolved trauma, the invisible wounds, the emotional harm that has been caused but really is unrecognized.
Now, let us start off by first defining trauma and understanding what trauma is. So, what is trauma?
Okay, so our pretty standard definition is a trauma is an unexpected, extraordinary event that occurs that overwhelms our capacity to cope. Now, when we use that definition, we often apply it to what we usually know from trauma, people who have maybe been in war situations, people who have been in accidents. So we usually apply it to events that we can see where there was physical harm. So things like a crime that has occurred, somebody broke into your home, there was something tangible that had happened. You may have gotten attacked. There may have been a car accident. There was gunshots, traumas like that. That's usually our standard understanding of a trauma. Let's go a little bit deeper and realize also that there's unrecognized trauma. So things that have occurred that are, it still fits into that definition of being extraordinary. It's not really normal. It shouldn't really be happening. But the end outcome and the actual outcome itself, the behaviors are not necessarily so tangible. So we look at something like parental neglect. When a child is neglected, it is a form of child abuse, and we actually, when somebody is older, we can recognize it as a form of trauma. For children who have, perhaps they're living with a family member who is suddenly imprisoned, they commit some crime, and the police come and arrest this family member in front of the children. So oftentimes people think that the children, they must just keep quiet and stay out of it. It's not their business. It's a matter for the adults. But remember, the little eyes are looking, the little ears are listening. So they are very much impacted by that. Instability, childhood instability. So children who live lives where they don't know where their next meal is coming from. They don't know whether their parent is going to be there or not. Whose home are they going to be staying in? Who's their caregiver? Do they even have a caregiver for the day? Sometimes their caregivers are in and out of their lives. And then, the older siblings will step in until the next caregiver comes along. So that has great emotional impact on the children. I can give you another example of children who live with parents who have untreated mental disorders. So often mental disorders, people with mental disorders, their behaviors are very unpredictable. It can also be harmful to the children, so they may engage in harmful actions to the children. But somebody living with a family member who has untreated mental disorders, or even living with somebody who has addiction, so they may not even be taking it directly out on the child. The physical actions are not necessarily on the child, but just the erratic behavior, the uncertainty, the fear, it has an impact on the children, and it is usually not spoken about. Oftentimes when the behavior is stopped. So for example, if you're living with somebody with a mental health disorder and they now go onto treatment, then it's just assumed that the behavior has stopped, the children are safe, so there's no issue there. But it can stay with them. And what we find then, the end outcomes also is, I'll speak a little bit about the range of behaviors that may occur in adulthood. But what we find also is that we often find people who have diagnosed depression in adulthood or anxiety, and they really don't know why they have it. On paper, their lives seem quite fine. Things seem to be going well. They don't necessarily have so much stress. They have significant relationships. They have financial stability. They may be working. Things are working out. They're not sure why they have this depression. And they may be on medication. They may be in different treatments. And they don't know why. And when you actually dig down and you go into so usually therapists, our starting point also is to look at your childhood, your background. We then realize that there was actually a lot going on. It may not have caused immediate physical harm, but there was a lot going on, and the outcomes are then usually your adult behaviors that can be unhealthy. It can then become destructive even. We can go on self-sabotage in a lot of our behaviors. So these unrecognized, invisible wounds from young, it has an impact as we get older, but it's not also only when we're children. So we can receive invisible wounds as adults also. So things like working in an unhealthy, unsafe, I guess I'll use the word toxic, a work environment where you are being bullied, where you are experiencing some form of secondary trauma, that also will have an impact on you. You know, our first responders, our people who are working in accidents and emergencies, our security, people who are working in SATs, police officers, your security guards, your higher trained response officers, they experience these things. Their lives are constantly in danger. They witness a lot of harm towards other people. And it's just expected that because they are safe, that it's just another day on the job for them. But it does, I think, especially with the pandemic, a lot of medical professionals and frontline professionals, they have really opened up about the impact and the mental health challenges that they experience. So, in general, the rest of us in society, we've now got a greater insight into how their work impacts on them, into how the harm that they just see, it's not on them, it's not the physical harm, doesn't come to them, but what they witness and they expected to deal with, it has a great toll on their mental health as well. And it will then also impact on their families, on their relationships, um, and we then just we perpetuate the cycle. Then our children then carry on with the harmful behaviors that we are bringing in, that they witness with us, and the cycle then just continues. So we want to create awareness about this so that we can break that cycle, do something different, to reach out for some form of help so that we can break the cycle and we don't have to carry intergenerational trauma um, into the future carrying on.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, how does unrecognized and unprocessed trauma affect us, especially like uh, uh, the short term trauma, like the one working in a toxic environment, compared to the childhood traumas that you grew up with, and then you realize, okay, this is related to my childhood. That's why I'm feeling a certain way. But now, as an adult, how does that unrecognized and unprocessed trauma affect us, and how can we recognize that this is what happened?
Okay, so let's look at, we can start off with the physical, some of the physical effects, some of the physical symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes it's appetite change. Some people, they may eat a lot more. They may they may eat out of stress and they do comfort eating, and some people lose their appetite completely. So there might be weight gain or there might be weight loss. We always look for extreme behaviors, right? So what is not usual for somebody?
Mm-hmm.
Then also there may be ongoing sicknesses. So psychosomatic sicknesses, pains that somebody gets. They may develop an autoimmune disease that gets aggravated by our stressful situations. There may be things like migraines, unexplained headaches, um, even things like skin outbreaks, acne outbreaks. Um, People may become very withdrawn. They do not enjoy the things they used to enjoy. And I think you mentioned earlier also that sometimes the emotional responses may just be it's just very different. So it's out of proportion to the actual situation. People may suddenly become quite angry over something that's maybe not necessarily so serious. Uh, People may also they may withdraw, so they may cut themselves off from things that they used to enjoy. People that they used to spend time with, they don't spend time with their loved ones anymore. They are very much withdrawn. The relationship suffers. So they perhaps where they used to make an effort with their significant other, they now withdraw. They struggle with their children, so their parenting gets impacted. They may struggle with their tasks, keeping up with their tasks, so they can't really meet deadlines. They may suffer from, I guess I'll call it procrastination delay. There's a lot of fear and stress associated to their tasks, so they constantly put it off. Um, and then they find then that they're not keeping up with what's required of them, so they're hitting deadlines, which are deadlines are coming very close. They're hitting a very difficult time around deadlines, and that puts them under even significant stress. Um, they may also experience sort of a breakdown where they shut down. They just cannot cope. They may end up in hospital. You can go to your doctor and he may book you in for a stay at a health retreat, or he may book you at the mental health facilities just for 2 weeks or 3 weeks because you are not able to cope. You need that time out, you need that focus on your mental health. So you may then be prescribed a medication, you be prescribed therapy, because you reached a point where you really need to, you are not going to be able to function. So that's just some of the short-term effects. Oftentimes also people turn to substances, so they use a narcotic, or they may even use something like a food substance, a prescription drug. They turn to that to be able to cope with the challenges, to be able to cope with the world that they are experiencing, which is very, very difficult. I'll just tell you a little bit about some of the responses that I think we know about, fight or flight. So those are
Mm-hmm.
some
Yeah.
responses that people utilize. We know, usually we know it more under more physical traumas. So if somebody is about to attack you, or an animal is about to attack you, so we know about fight or flight. But we also have it as responses for emotions that we experience, for social situations that we go through. Oftentimes, let's say we go through a difficult work situation, a short-term difficult situations. We recognize something is off, something is not good. We are not in a state of balance. So it may be the stress, it may be the pressure that you put under, it may be the downright disrespect, it may be the verbal abuse that you experience from the work environment. And some work environments are very, very difficult, where it's nature actually to talk to each other in a very disrespectful way, in a very difficult way. So it's regarded as normal, but your mind and body knows, you know yourself. So when it recognizes that something is off, it then has certain responses also. So when we talk about emotional fight, so there's healthy and unhealthy responses to these invisible traumas. A healthy sense of fight to an invisible trauma, is where you are able to assert yourself, you're able to respond with confidence, you are able to assert some boundaries, you are able to show courageous behavior. And the healthy outcome then is that the invisible trauma then stops. So, for example, if it's an abusive colleague, you are able to then stand up to that person. In a relationship, if you are in an unhealthy relationship, you are able to assert your boundaries, that your partner may not, for example, access your money without your permission. Okay, so that's a healthy fight response. An unhealthy fight response would be something where you become very controlling, you go into attack mode. So you may attack your partner, you may fight with them, you may control their behavior, you may punish them because you're not fighting. So you may take what's theirs also. Okay, so that's unhealthy. You may actually turn around and bully your partner. That's unhealthy fighting response. The next one that we have also is flight. So when we think of our normal understanding of flight, it's where we run away from the danger. Okay, and that works. We run away from the danger, so that's self-preservation. We protect ourselves. Healthy, a healthy flight response to emotional wounds. Disengaging from harmful conversations. So if somebody is drawing you into a something verbally abusive, you just disengage. A healthy one also, flight, is leaving an unhealthy relationship, leaving a harmful relationship, removing yourself from physically dangerous situations. So if you're in a relationship or in a situation where there's actually physical harm, you remove yourself. Sometimes, of course, your opponent, the person who's attacking you, is strong and you can't physically defend yourself. So you remove yourself, you properly assess that the danger is too much for you to cope with, so you then flee. That's regarded as a healthy response to difficult situations. When there's unhealthy flight response, so sometimes in relationships, so oftentimes now, something may not necessarily have happened, but ongoing, when we talk about people who have unresolved trauma from the past, they may have obsessive tendencies in their relationships, or they may constantly leave relationships for no real reason. They flee from the relationship, so they ghost their partner. They get divorced for no real reason that their partner can understand. They may constantly be on the move. They constantly want to move. They can't really sit still. They may not be able to really commit to something tangible. They have workaholic tendencies, so they're constantly doing something, but they don't necessarily see it to completion. Okay, so those are unhealthy flight responses. I can go into freeze responses quickly. Freeze, so oftentimes
Right. Before
in
you do that, Shuhaida, let us take a quick break. And when we come back, we can talk about freeze and appease.
Clothing and blankets, fresh water portal trucks, and even on-site navigators. We use every cent to better their tomorrow. Become part of our journey to bring relief to all. Go to www.ashrafulaid.org or call us on 011 809 8181. Ashraful Aid, under the auspices of Maulana Suhail Wadi.
Babu, why don't you loosen your belt a bit more?
But why now?
Well, it's very tight, blocking air to your brain.
Haju, this is only a start. I need to tighten up a bit more. Funds are tight and the cost of living is high.
Funds are not tight. It's your haram insurance which is tightening our barakat.
Okay, Haju. I will call my insurance friend tomorrow.
Maybe I must tighten up on my cooking from now on too.
No, Haju, we don't need to tighten up. It's okay. Look, I'm even throwing away my belt.
Don't tighten your belt. Change your insurance. Leaving Riba Insurance is easier than you think. Call Amana IFS for all your personal and commercial takaful needs. 0861 786 393. Amana. Leave Riba for good. Amana IFS is a registered financial services provider.
Little bare feet on the icy wet ground, a shiver at his lips, mud on his clothes. When he is cold, the hunger is worse, the nights are longer, and the pain is more severe. What if this was your child? The Al-Imdad Foundation's Global Winter Appeal allows you to make a difference for refugees, IDPs, and struggling communities in 21 countries globally. Sponsor a winter pack today for just 600 Rand. Donate online at alimdad.com or call 0861 786 243.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
Welcome back. You are listening to the Mid Morning Talk on Salam Media. It is 18 minutes past 12. And on today's segment with Islamic Careline, we are unpacking unrecognized or unhealed trauma with Shuhaida Adam. Shuhaida, shukran for staying on the line. Now, before the break, you were talking about the trauma responses, fight, and flight, and the healthy types of flight and the healthy types of fighting. Now, let's move on to the next responses.
Okay, Shukran. No, let's carry on. I hope people are finding this quite informative. When I learned about this, I found it really, really informative. So we did fight, flight. Then I think one we always know also is freeze. So when we are not responding, okay, we're taking some time out. So of course, when there's physical danger and you freeze, the harm may come to you. However, when it's the emotional wounds. So what we find also an emotional freezing response. Healthily, it's when people don't immediately react. So we don't immediately jump into the situation, or we don't immediately make a decision that we haven't fully thought through, or we acted on impulse. Okay, so healthy freeze response is where you take some time out, maybe to calm yourself, to regain your self control, mindfulness. You heighten your sense of awareness. You maybe do some breathing, and then you feel more confident to be able to cope with the situation. Now, when we have an emotional attack, oftentimes we do have the luxury of time for freezing. Okay, so we can take some time out. I mean, somebody may not necessarily be in front of you, so you can sort of take some time out, and you can have that just breathing and collecting yourself. Freezing unhealthily. So the unhealthy freezing response. Oftentimes, we find with children, when they are living in an abusive situation, living with abusive parents, or there's abuse around them, they're witnessing it. They freeze, so they don't do anything. They may become silent. They go and sit and don't do a single thing. Okay, so they stay as still and quiet as possible so that they do not attract the attention of the abusive person. It's a matter of self-preservation for them. Somebody, they may become so overwhelmed with fear around a certain person, around a certain situation, or when they're required to do something. So, for example, if they are required to go on their own, let's say they get sent on an errand or something, and children who then freeze, they can't do it. They may suddenly become overwhelmed. They find themselves in a shop, or they find themselves suddenly out of their comfort zone, and they then freeze, and they may then just sit down and start crying, or they won't know what to do. Okay, they're absolutely frozen. As adults, we find that people who freeze, they may experience disassociation. So they cannot connect with the world around them. They cannot connect with people who are right in front of them. The environment suddenly looks very strange. There's isolation. So they cut themselves off from the situation. They cut themselves off from the world around them. People who freeze often struggle to make decisions. So they're very caught up in indecisiveness, and they just don't act. They get frozen in that act of indecisiveness. Okay. Sometimes people who freeze and who are living in fear of actually doing. They may be perceived as lazy. They may be perceived as uninterested, as unwilling, as unmotivated. The reality is that there's a lot going on the inside. When we experience fear, then our tummy is usually one of the first places that experiences that physical fear. So people who are living with that constant stomach upsetness, that stomach anxiety, that senses of anxiety, people who are living with that, people who are constantly frozen, they live with that. Okay. One last trauma response that not really known also. I only also learned about it recently, is fawning. So FAWN, the fawn trauma response. It's related to people pleasing. Okay, again, it's self-preservation. It's a matter of protecting ourselves from the harm that our mind perceives us to be in. And this involves pleasing the source of the trauma. So trying to make sure that the source of the trauma does not attack us in any way. So if you look, if we can consider the analogy of in nature when there's a wild dog chasing you or a wild animal, and you maybe, you're not going to be able to run, you're not going to be able to fight it. And if you freeze, he's coming for you. So you may be having some meal or some snack or a piece of meat. You throw it to the dog. The dog is now happy. So you made the dog happy, and he then does not target you. Okay. So consider that also with people. You are when a source of emotional harm, a source of an invisible wound, constantly attacks you. You may then do your best to make this person happy. So you'll find your children who are people pleasers. They are constantly trying to make people around them happy, make their parent happy, always doing for their parent so that the parent doesn't get upset at them. They take on a lot of responsibility. You find people here also in unhealthy personal intimate relationships. They may be codependent. They may be, if it's a violent relationship, they may be doing what they can to make sure this person does not be upset at them. People pleasing to a point of losing yourself. So you will have no real boundaries. People can do what they want. They can tramp all over you because you don't want them to be upset at you in any way. So even if you lose your sense of self, you lose your boundaries, you may even lose physical items because you give it to them to protect yourself. So that is an unhealthy response. The healthy response for fawning, so making people happy. The healthy response is where you have a sense of compassion for others, you care for others, you act with a sense of fairness towards people. So if somebody is unhappy about something, you do your best, you want to compromise without your boundaries being trampled on, without them disrespecting you, without them causing you harm, because you now have a healthy balance between how much harm they can cause you versus how much self-preservation and protection you can have. So this fawning response is a benefit to it, but also there is a lot of harm also. And it's actually a lot more common than people would realize. And I think people do also, a lot of us have some of it in us. So what I've given us is just a little bit of information around that. In general, our invisible wounds also. General outcomes, people as adults, they may find that they find it very difficult to trust people, and they also find it difficult to trust themselves. We are often our own worst enemies. The voices in our heads often give us the most negative talk. So people who have not really healed from invisible wounds, they constantly talk themselves down. They do not have faith in their capabilities and in their capacity to do, their capacity to bring about change. People don't have that. They may find themselves engaging in addiction. Their relationships, they may engage in self-harm behavior, self-sabotage behavior towards their partners. Their partners may also be engaging in healthy behaviors, but because we're not very used to healthy behaviors, it's very abnormal for us. So we then engage in unhealthy behaviors to bring about what we know is normal, which is unhealthy behaviors. So we can also be destructive in our very healthy relationships with healthy partners, but unresolved wounds, unhealed traumas has an impact very wide-reaching, and it will cause further impact. And I spoke a little bit about intergenerational trauma earlier. So we then, of course, put it onto our children, and our children then get caught into this, and they then perpetuate it further. So what can be done, of course, is the first sign. I think we've spoken a few weeks ago about change. And one of the first things about change is reflection, of recognizing something unsettling, recognizing something is not okay. I'm not okay with this. And then bringing about that change, because I'm sure people have heard the saying, nothing changes if nothing changes. Okay, so recognizing something, you want to change something, and then deciding how you want to go about it. You can come for therapy, you can consult other wellness consultants, life coaches, doctors even. You can consult whoever you would like to help you along this journey, but recognize also, especially when it happened in the past and a long time ago, change doesn't happen overnight. So as much time as it took for you to get to this point, we need quite a bit of time to heal from what it is that caused you to get to this point. So unfortunately, change does not happen overnight, especially internal change. Healing is not overnight, but when people are committed to working towards that change, they are in it for the long run. So then there's a lot of confidence in the journey of change.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I still wanted to ask a bit more questions, but I see time is not on our side, unfortunately. But hopefully, inshallah, we'll get some more insight and information. But what you have just mentioned, especially with the trauma responses, we've only been we only knew about fight or flight, and we didn't know anything about appease, fawning, freezing. We just always knew about fight or flight, but perhaps uh, we knew what the others were, but we did not have a term for them, and now we do, and it's there. And shukran for that. Unfortunately, once again, time is not on our side, but shukran for your time and for enlightening us on unrecognized trauma.
Afwan, it's always a pleasure, and people are welcome to contact us on 011-373-8080 for further information. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shuhaida Adam, social worker at Islamic Careline. And for more information regarding counseling for of your choice, you can contact them on 0111-373-8080. That's 011-373-8080. You are listening to the Mid Morning Talk on Salam Media. We will be right back.